Welcome to Commander Central episode 245, and today we're going to be talking about listener Stuart Kinnair's Sisay Weatherlight Captain Enchantress deck. I'm Dana.
And I'm Max.
No Chris today, it's just the two of us, flying duo, I guess, not solo.
I guess.
He had some personal stuff going on, so we'll try to keep the ship on course here without him. But he should be back next week.
Yeah.
So Max, how's life treating you here?
It's frigid, which is fine, I guess. It beats snow, like I've said in the past, so I'm fine with this cold. It's not like we go anywhere anyways, so...
Very true.
I feel bad for my roommate. He delivers appliances and works in a warehouse, so he's in this stuff 6 days a week, so I kind of feel bad for him, but oh well.
But it's not you.
Exactly.
So. Yeah, it's miserable out, but... It's nice and sunny, and I can look out the window and see sun and see the sky, and at the very least, that's better than it being miserable and cloudy. And so having some sunshine streaming in the window makes me feel good. I'm taking a little bit of solace in that at the very least, that I feel like we're on the other end of winter here finally, and spring isn't that far away.
And in about a month and a half from now, when we get that last 12 inches of snow that we always get in the middle of April, right. I'm going to say, Dana, remember episode 245 when you said we're almost done with winter on February 12th?
You know what? I will be fine with that just because it'll be warmer out and
right.
I can actually go outside and not have to wrap myself up like a mummy when I walk the dog.
Yeah.
Who, speaking of, my dog is very well behaved. She's very disciplined about when she has to go outside, except for last night when she literally jumped on the bed at 3:30 in the morning and had to go outside very clearly. So I had to wake up at 3:30 and get dressed and walk outside in I think it was -11 because I checked, to walk my dog around the block at 3:30 in the morning. And I swore at her a little bit during the walk, but didn't appreciate that. But hopefully we go another 5 years before it happens again like that in the middle of the night. So
hey, sometimes when you gotta go, you gotta go.
I mean,
it beats going on the bed.
Exactly. I've been there before, so I can relate, I guess. Did you play any fun games this week, Max?
We played last weekend. I think this is the first time we've recorded since then. So we got to play last Saturday night. We played with Seb and Kelly, and those were some good games. I got to see
they were very good games.
Voltron deck just kind of went out of nowhere.
Yeah.
I think Kelly just said, I think I have enough mana, we're going to see if this works. And then we all kind of sat there, and if this was in person, we all would have been tapping cards and counting mana, and we're all just yeah, this does it, you win. You
got it. Yeah, those are really fun games. Really well balanced. Everyone kind of had their chance to shoot their shot, and yeah, that was a good time.
Yeah. What about you? You played on EDH Rec this week for sure.
I played on the EDH Rec cast stream. We had Ashlyn Rose on as our guest, the cosplayer, and she actually edits a lot of our stuff on the EDH Rec cast because she works for Command Zone. We played a 3.5 hour game. It was insane. It was insane.
I think I tuned in at the beginning of the stream, and I'm like, oh, cool, Dana's playing his new Boros deck. And then I had to go do something, so I came back a couple hours later. I'm like, he's still playing that Boros deck. Okay, he ran it back. I'm like, no, he didn't. This is still the same game. And then I had to leave again and go do something else. And I came back at 10:30, and it's still the same game, and everybody is at 15 to 20 life. I'm like, what is going on here? And every time I checked in, you were either at 40, or you always had more life than everybody whenever I checked in.
I had gained a good bit, and then what happened was at one point Matt cast whatever that red, is it Fires of Invention?
Aria of Flame.
Aria of Flame, so he gained everybody 10 life, and then it got destroyed fairly quickly. So that screwed things up, and just everybody had an answer. Whenever someone was about to Alpha Strike and make the win, somebody had an answer for it. So it was just, it wasn't a ton of stuff didn't happen, but that's a long time for a game.
Yeah.
But the new Boros deck I was pretty happy with. I enjoyed playing it, so that's a plus one. I think I'm going to keep that deck around and try it, make a few tweaks and see what I can do with it. But I enjoyed it.
Awesome.
It is Boros, but I like the challenge, so that was fun.
Yeah, it definitely looked like it was performing better than it played on Saturday when I played against it with you and Seb and Kelly. So it'll be interesting to see where you take it, if you can make any more big improvements to really make it feel like not a Boros deck, I guess. Is that the way to say that?
Right. I just threw in Showdown of the Skalds actually today, which is the new saga that was in Kaldheim that basically has like that the impulse draw 4 cards for the first mode, and then you put counters on stuff whenever you cast a spell for the other 2 modes.
Yeah.
But for 4 mana, the harmonize essentially effect on it is pretty useful. So I added that, and there's a few other tweaks I'm going to make probably in the next few days. I was going to add a Pia and Kiernan Nalar just to get, because that's 3 bodies, and I want to have at least 3 bodies to swing with every turn to maximize using Adriana's melee ability. So I'm going to put that in there, I think, because I need a couple more token producers. But
do you run the red lieutenant that makes a Thopter every upkeep?
I probably should. I think the reason I didn't put it initially was because it doesn't make Thopters if Adriana isn't out, and when I drop Adriana, I want to make sure I already have 3 creatures in place so I can swing on everybody with them.
That makes sense.
At that point, they get +3/+3 at least.
Yeah.
So I think that's why I didn't put it in.
Gotcha. Makes sense.
In P and Kieran, that's why I didn't put in like things like Assemble the Legion, because it's 5 mana and it's not going to make the first token until the next turn. And I have to choose if I have it in my opening hand, do I play it or do I play Adriana? So I was trying to keep things also 4 mana or less so I could get them in before I play her and have them able to attack immediately.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah, it's been fun so far. So if you out there in listener land want to tell us about some fun games you played or any new decks you built, how would you go about doing that, Max?
You can find us on a multitude of social media platforms. You can find us on Twitter at CMDR Central. You can Facebook search us CMDR Central. You can listen to our show and see all the awesome graphics that Rafael Garcia makes for our backdrop every week on youtube.com/CMDR Central. And you can also check us out over at patreon.com/CMDR Central.
I think we have a couple new Patreon supporters this week as well.
We do. We want to say thank you and welcome to Gabriel Varel. I have no idea how to pronounce that. I'm sorry. Gabriel V is what I'm going to say.
Okay.
Paul Schock and Mike Almond.
And I think, having heard it pronounced, I think it's Villarreal, but I might be incorrect. I think I've heard it pronounced Villarreal before.
There we go. Thank you, Dana.
I am probably wrong. I got made fun of this week on the EDH Rec stream for pronouncing what's pronounced waifu, I guess, as waifu. So, you know what? I might be wrong there as well.
I mean, I was bound to get a week of difficult names to pronounce after last week having the most basic names ever.
We were due. So there's not much exciting happening in Magic necessarily right now. We're kind of in the lull in between sets before we get the stuff from Strixhaven and before we get the full list of reprints for Time Spiral Remastered. But we did get a bunch of Secret Lairs that dropped this week. The first of which was called Fairy Rad, which is foil only, and it's 4 kind of bright rainbow-colored fairies. There's a Spellstutter Strike, there's a Vidalian Click, Glenelendra Archmage, and Mistbind Click. So that one, I thought the fairies art looked really cool, and those, I liked that.
Yeah, we also got the unfathomable, crushing brutality of basic lands. This one will come in a non-foil or a foil, the non-foil being $29.99 and the foil being $39.99. And you get one of each basic land in the awesome Kaldheim metal theme. This one is really cool. I like the artwork. It doesn't look like any basic land I've ever seen. I think the closest I would compare them to is maybe the Theros Beyond Death ones, just because the mana symbol is so pronounced in this artwork. Right. But it definitely follows the metal theme that Kaldheim is all about. Unfortunately, $30 for 5 basic lands when, EDH players most EDH players need at least a dozen basic lands of at least one type to play. So maybe this will be great for your eventual 5-color deck, Dana. These will be your 5 basics.
Just one of each. There we go.
We also got a Valentine's Day 2021 in pink Cupid-themed art. Again, this comes in foil and non-foil at $29.99 for the non and $39.99 for the foil. And we get some awesome Valentine's Day art versions of Boros Charm, Gisela Blade of Gold Knight, Goblin Rabblemaster, Heliod, the Sun-Crowned, Monastery Swiftspear, and some Goblin tokens.
And just to throw this out there, because I didn't know this, I thought it was weird to have Heliod on there. Apparently in Theros lore, Heliod was originally the god of love on Theros before he became the sun god.
Before he went all evil and tried to destroy everyone. Gotcha.
That's
so he had his heart broke. He had his heart broke. That's what happened.
Yep. The last two we had were kind of just two different versions of a very similar theme. They are Kaldheim Giants, and one is the Primeval Titan, one's Frost Titan, and one is Uro, and the other one is Grave Titan, Inferno Titan, and Kroxa, and they are all in the special Kaldheim frame we saw recently. Strangely enough, these are priced weirdly. The Uro one is $24.99 for the non-foil, $34 for the foil. The Kroxa one is $29.99 for the non-foil, and $39.99 for the foil. So that's odd. I would wonder if the reason for that is perhaps this announcement we got also with these secret lairs, which says they are planning an upcoming banned and restricted announcement where they plan to ban Uro in Pioneer, Modern, and Historic. So I'm wondering if they knocked $5 off the price of the Uro set because he's going to get banned in 3 formats maybe.
I mean, between that being banned in already standard and the 3 other formats he'll eventually be banned in, and maybe just paying a little bit of attention to the Commander community, Primeval Titan, you can't play in EDH.
Oh,
so,
good point.
I don't think I think Uro is the reason for the price drop more than Primeval Titan, but I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt and say it's both.
Sure, because that one does have, it's got cards that are banned in it, 2 of the 3 in different formats. Good point. Good catch. So anyway, are either of those interesting to you, Max, or have anything that you want to get? I know we talked about the Magic is Black one that isn't fully spoiled quite yet, and we were both interested in that one. Do either of these two catch your eye, really?
Out of this big super drop that they're doing for the Valentine's Day holiday, I think that all the art is cool. I really love the Kaldheim special frame, that Viking frame. I really like those. The more I see them and the more I've acquired them. Unfortunately, I don't think I'll pick any of these up just because I don't play any of the Titans for the Kaldheim ones. I don't play a lot of Boros, and if I do, I have a lot of these cards, except for maybe Heliod. And I don't know, I don't need an extra copy of Gwenelendra Archmage, but the rest of the fairies look cool.
If I had a fairy deck, I would absolutely grab the fairy one. The art looks great on them. So that one I'm a fan of, but same as you, I don't have any use from the vast majority of these cards. I do play a Grave Titan in my Glissa deck, but I have the kind of weird Duel of the Planeswalkers promo already in there, which I kind of like because everyone's like, what is that already? So I don't know if that's worth making an upgrade for either. But hey, if you're someone out there who's wanted a Primo version, because there's no cool version of Frost Titan really.
No.
So if you're someone who plays that or Inferno Titan or whatever, these give you a way to get kind of a premium version of those cards. So, it's an option.
Yeah, those 2 Titans, Frost and Inferno, kind of got the shaft when it came to those alt printings that Grave Titan and Sun Titan got for those releases. But, to each their own. And, as we've advocated before on our show, these secret lairs are great because you aren't told you have to buy them. They're at your leisure. If you really want these, go buy them. They're cool. But you know what? You don't have to. You don't have to pull the trigger like on any product that comes out. It's up to you. You're the consumer. No one's making you buy this stuff.
And if you don't, you might still benefit because someone who buys that Grave Titan and puts it in their deck and then gets rid of their existing Grave Titan, that might put more on the market to make them a little bit cheaper too. So you might benefit just by it existing. So it's kind of a win-win. I'm also a big fan of these. Okay, should we jump into the main topic here?
Let's do it.
All right, we are looking at Stuart Kinnair's Sisay Weatherlight Captain deck here. And as always, we usually send our patrons a little list of questions to answer. So what did Stuart have to say about his deck here, Max?
Stuart says, first off, we always ask, what is your meta like? And Stuart said, well, my meta has been the Commander Central Slack channel via the VDH group since the pandemic began. But my local friend... That. Hey, it's a great place to play.
It is.
But his local friend group is really quite casual. The Commander Central group is probably 1 or 2 turns faster with more optimized decks than what he has in his stable or tends to play with his local group. He likes to keep a stable of decks that he can loan to friends because they aren't as invested in the game. So they're decks that someone can pick up that has, ideally fit within that. They can play them, they understand the basics of the game, and they can excel with whatever deck they pick up out of his stable. He also tries to keep his decks from not having easily achieved combo wins. Generally, he likes to win through some kind of combat or commander damage. Yeah. And then he finds himself playing in games that people are trying to win on turns 8 or 9, though that obviously varies. Spot removal is given in most cases, and I expect to fight through at least 1 or 2 board wipes in a game.
And then we asked, what is the goal of the deck? And Stuart says he wanted to build a deck with an Enchantress engine that wins through splashy plays once he's generated enough value to stay ahead after he tries to make a move. He chose Sisay Weatherlight Captain because Sisay was his first EDH deck back in 2009, and he has a lot of nostalgia for playing with that character at the helm. He kept the deck together until Modern Horizons came out, but had gotten kind of formulaic because you just tutor for the same things most games, and it was kind of boring and not much fun for his friends either. He likes the added challenge of new Sisay's ability that you have to think about her power and try to make choices to kind of buff that up. And he thought Planeswalkers would be a good, powerful way to make some endgame moves while living through most of the mass removal spells so he could kind of stay ahead.
And then we ask, what are the areas of weakness or areas that we should focus on while doing this deck tech? And Stuart said it's a deck with a very big split personality. Very often I seem to draw one half of the deck or the other and can't count on getting the engine running. The finishers are fun and splashy but generate too much hate at the table, and I can't keep ahead long enough to close out games. It is a super fun deck as is, but rarely wins because it gets too scary or fizzles out. Sisay's power seems to not often get high enough to really grab those expensive spells that could actually put him way ahead in the game. He's not married to the Planeswalkers, but he does want to continue to use Sisay's ability effectively to win the game. Ultimately, he's hoping to tune the machine up to run more consistently and keep the finishers interesting. I'm open to changing almost anything about the deck.
And last, we asked what the budget restrictions for a single card upgrade or all upgrades are. He says he already has a lot of expensive stuff, so he's not looking to spend more than $20 on any one card. Which, given the crazy price increases we've seen in the last few months, $20 buys you less than it did in the not too distant past.
In December of 2020.
Right, exactly.
So let's kick it off, and we're going to read Sisay Weatherlight Captain for our audience here. Sisay is a legendary creature human soldier for 2 and a white. It has base power and toughness 2/2, and it says Sisay Weatherlight Captain gets +1/+1 for each color among other legendary permanents you control, and she has an activated ability of Wooburg. Search your library for a legendary permanent card with converted mana cost less than Sisay's power. Put that card onto the battlefield, and then shuffle your library.
Okay, so first things first, we'll look at the land base and try to bear in mind here that, see, this is a kind of a strange card in that you don't need 5 colors to cast her, which makes it relatively easy to do, but you do need 5 to use her ability, so you still want to have a good spread of colors among the land base to get her to use the ability once she's out, even if she is much easier to cast than like a 5-color Niv Mizzet or something. So we're looking at a land base of 35 lands, and that's not very many for a 5-color deck, I don't think. What do you think, Max?
I would agree with that. When I went through this deck last night, I actually wrote kind of a chunk of notes here just on the land base. So, I run 35 lands in Dragonlord Jamoka, and that's a 2-color deck that's heavy white, and I would say maybe 50 to 60% of the time, I should probably be running 36 lands. That's just how that deck works. So, just thinking of... I had Chris in the back of my head saying, in 3 colors, you should always have at least 37 unless you're, super heavy into rocks, which this deck isn't. I'll be full upfront. This deck does not have a lot of rocks to make up for that low land count. So, yeah, I agree with you. 35, I think, is very low for 5 colors, even though Sisay only needs white to be cast.
Yeah, I do think there are decks that can function with 35 if you've got, like you said, a ton of rocks, particularly the 0-mana rocks, or your CMC on everything is super low, or you're running a ton of filtering effects if, you're playing a blue deck that's running all the different, Ponder and Preordain and Portent and Brainstorm kind of variants where you're looking to dig down and it makes it easier to find your land as well. This deck isn't doing that, and I think the bad luck is going to hit you more frequently than you would like at 35 lands.
For sure.
The plus, I would say, is there are 5 different fetches here, and only... it's 2 of them produce colorless mana.
Yep.
And there's Serra Sanctum, which number 1 is really good in Enchantress deck. Doesn't tap for mana at all unless you have an enchantment in place, so that's kind of a downside there. But as far as mana base goes, it's very friendly to a 5-color deck, other than I feel like you're just going to miss land drops on turn 3 or 4 more often than you would like.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I actually did the playtest in Architect with this last night, and I just did about 20 test hands, and I did like the first 3 draws. And I definitely agree with Stuart's notes. It's a very split personality deck. I either saw a bunch of the enchantments or I saw a bunch of like the support for the deck. But it was rough because my hands either had, I always got cards for the mana I didn't have. So like I drew a bunch of like green X dual lands or something, and I drew black and red cards or black and blue cards. So I don't know how you fix that without adding more lands.
Yes, I kind of agree. And I don't think you need to go to 40 or anything. I honestly think 37 is probably fine. 38 or 39 would probably be better, obviously, or maybe safer. But I think you'd be fine at 37. And I think if you added even just like 2 triomes there because they're fetchable, it will just give you so many fixing options as well. It like kills two birds with one stone. You can use those 5 different fetches you have to go grab those triomes that are going to then give you 3 different of your possible colors. And their deck doesn't use a ton of red anyway, so you can afford to only have 1 red source because it's probably only ever going to be used for Sisay's ability. So I think grabbing a couple triomes might probably do the trick here, I think, going to 37 and just adding 2 more in.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Just so I'll quickly go over what the mana base actually is in this deck. There are 5 fetches. There's a Fabled Passage, a Prismatic Vista, the blue-white slow fetch, the green-white slow fetch, and then a Croson Verge. So 2 of those fetches get basic lands. 1 gets a forest and a plains, and the other 2 get your duels or your triomes. So I agree, those are great. We have all the original Battle Bond lands, the allied colors, all the shocks, and a few of the check lands like Woodland Cemetery, and a few, we have like a Yavimaya Hollow for regeneration, the Sarah's Sanctum, which Dana mentioned, and then there's also like Karn's Bastion and Hall of Heliod's Generosity just for some utility lands. Karn's Bastion can do a bunch of stuff, proliferate effects with how the planeswalkers are in the deck right now, so I like that include as it is. Just looking at the land base before even analyzing it, it looked like a great 5-color mana base out of the gate.
Yeah, it's really, really solid.
But, I mean, I agree. Just adding a couple more triomes or just the enemy Battle Bond lands, since those are pretty readily available now, will probably help this a lot. I do agree the triomes are fetchable. Those would probably edge out the Battle Bond lands when you're only adding 2 lands, because it's just 2. And unlike something like my Tuvasa deck, which is an Enchantress deck, but that is super Voltron, super fast, I don't think this deck wants to be fast. I think it's more of a mid-range to late-game deck. So I think the triomes will just overall, coming in tapped isn't going to hurt your game plan. Yeah, I tend to agree with that for sure. Okay, so overall deck construction here. You mentioned you ran this a bunch of times, just kind of, dealing out goldfish hands, and you noticed the split personality thing as well here, Max. Yeah. I didn't do as many as you, but I did a few test hands, and I felt the same way. I could never decide, like, okay, well, I got this Planeswalker in hand, but the deck doesn't have a ton of creatures to protect it, and some of the ones that you do have, like, there's Argothian Enchanters in here. That's not going to be something you block with. You're not blocking with your Seedborn Muse for the most part. Like, those really aren't protection because they're more valuable to you most of the time in play than they are as protections for, like, your Jace Beleren. So it's split personality, and also those split personalities don't necessarily synergize that well together. Yeah. So I think we kind of had the same thought here, which was what, Max? My exact notes are take out all the planeswalkers. I get why they're here. I liked the original idea, but I don't think they do enough, especially with the fact that this deck has almost 40 or almost 30 enchantments, and all of these planeswalkers really don't do anything with enchantments. They're just token makers or value engines like a draw engine or something like that. So my initial impression was cut all 10 planeswalkers that are in the deck. And we might as well go through those right now since we're talking about them. Sure. So those 10 are Jace Beleren, Liliana Vess, Liliana Dreadhorde General, Narset Parter of Veils, Nicol Dragon God, Nicol God Pharaoh, Oko, Thief of Crowns, the Royal Scions, Vraska the Unseen, and Vraska Relic Seeker. So those are all good planeswalkers, but like you said, they're all planeswalkers that don't necessarily put you in a position to win the game. I mean, the Bolas ones can if you get a couple counters on them. They've got some devastating ults, that kind of thing. But they're really good utility pieces that do draw a ton of attention. Yeah. And this is in a deck that doesn't necessarily have great ways to defend them, too. Right. I mean, dropping a Narset Parter of Veils shuts down a lot of people because you can only draw 1 card per turn. People want that gone. So yeah, they probably going to deal with that quickly before turning back at you, or they're going to take the Max Crandall philosophy and say just player removal. versus Planeswalker removal, which again isn't great right now.
Right. And, yes, you can go grab Jace Beleren with Sisay's ability, but if it doesn't win you the game, then maybe it isn't that big of a deal versus, like, for example, one of the cards I'm definitely going to suggest when we get over to talk about enchantments is something like Ancestral Mask, where it gives a creature +2/+2 for every enchantment in play, not just that you control. You can't go get that with Sisay's ability because it's not legendary, but like when you drop that on Sisay somehow, you're going to kill somebody that turn. Like, you probably yourself have 3 or 4 or 5 enchantments in play at least. Somebody else usually has 1 or 2, most, if not most players. Like, that's lethal commander damage in one swing just from that card most of the time.
Yeah, I definitely agree there.
So if the deck is struggling to win, and that's a card that comes down and just gets the thing done versus Jace Beleren that comes down, and I keep using Jace because it's first alphabetically, but like that's true of most of these Royal Scions, Fresca the Unseen, whatever. They come down and they will do a useful thing, but that useful thing isn't going to win you the game, and then everyone's going to immediately start swinging to remove that piece. If you put something like an Ancestral Mask on Sisay, you have a pretty good chance of killing somebody, and okay, if they deal with it on their turn and remove it, it's already removed somebody. Like, you've already got a ton of value off of it.
Yeah, and another thing is, like, Sisay's ability is CMC less than its power, so this needs a little build-up. You just can't drop Sisay and go get a Planeswalker because all of these start at 3 CMC or higher. Like, you need to be able to buff up Sisay before you decide to use her.
Right. So let's look at the artifacts here, Max. We have 4 artifacts in this deck. Arcane Signet, Blackblade Reforged, a Chromatic Lantern, and a Soul Ring. What are your thoughts on those 4?
I mean, I like them all for a 5-color deck, especially because some of the cards that I will suggest don't, cost a lot of mana, or they do have colorless pips in them. So I think this is great. Arcane Signet, gets you that missing color you need to activate Sisay or something, and Blackblade Reforged is tutorable with Sisay, so like that's great as well. And that card alone can kill someone.
Yeah. Tutorable is a real big, not that Blackblade Reforged isn't really good anyway, because it's a really good card. Even better here when you can go grab it with your commander at that opportune moment, have it come into play, attach for very little mana, and then swing, because this ability isn't a tap ability either. So like if you're at that point in the game, you can grab it, put it on her, and swing at somebody, probably very often for lethal commander damage.
For sure.
The one I would suggest here, Arcane Signet is a great card. Since this is an enchantment deck and you have things that care about enchantments here, Arcane Signet's a great card, but there's things like Wolf Willow Haven that also cost 2 mana. It's 1 and a green, and it's enchant land. It's basically like not as good of a wild growth because it just adds a green, so it doesn't necessarily fix either, but like for the same cost as Arcane Signet, it's going to go onto a land, make you an extra mana as well, and interact with all the other things you have in the deck that care about enchantments. And that's at that exact cost. You can also do things like Fertile Ground. That's same thing, 1 and a green, and it adds mana of any color. It doesn't have like the ability to sacrifice itself to make a token like Wolf Willow Haven, but it's probably even better in a 5-color deck because it can make a mana of any color at all. So you have a couple options of like aura enchantments for lands. There's Utopia Sprawl too, but this deck doesn't have that many forests, so I wouldn't probably run that. But I would be very tempted myself to run one of those enchant lands, particularly Fertile Ground, over Arcane Signet. You're maybe a little more vulnerable to somebody strip mining that one land, but I don't know if that's going to happen often enough to matter. And I think the extra interaction with your enchantments is probably worth it.
Okay. Yeah, I definitely understand that. I'm not a big fan of the land enchantments. But my deck, again, is doing something completely different than this.
Sure.
Those were just too slow for me personally. I think in this deck, they work really well.
And also, I will note in the deck where I'm running them, I'm running a couple of the additional enchantresses that only draw you a card off of an aura, like Core Spirit Dancer.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a little bit extra synergy there, and that this deck isn't running those and probably shouldn't because there's not that many auras. So it's a little bit better in my deck maybe, but I still think it might be worth the trade-off here, particularly if we go with Ancestral Mask in the deck like I mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
Okay, since we're sticking with the categories that don't have much in them, what do we have for sorceries here, Max?
We have another 4 sorceries. So there's Day of Judgment, just a board wipe. Farseek gets a non-forest land. Primal Surge, exile the top card of your library. If it's a permanent card, you may put it onto the battlefield. if you do repeat the process. It's 10 mana. It's a lot of fun. I used to have a Primal Surge deck, and this is molded pretty well to be a Primal Surge deck with how many non-permanents are in here at the moment.
Yeah.
And then finally we have Replenish. Return all enchantment cards from your graveyard to play. Solid card. And wow, did that get expensive.
Yes, it did. Not much I would change here at all. Primal Surge and Replenish do what they do, and they're great at what they do. But what are your thoughts on that Farseek there?
I'm torn. It's the only one in the deck.
Yes.
So I get it. It'd be cool to see in your opening hand. But again, with what I was seeing playtesting, I never saw Farseek in my opening hand.
Oh, sure.
And I couldn't tell you how many times I didn't draw green mana in my opening hand. So, getting Farseek stuck in your hand with no green mana and
feels bad.
I would rather replace this with a draw spell.
Okay. I can see that.
If Stuart wants to do attacking, put a Chart a Course in here. Put even something like an Anticipate where you can look at 3, keep 1, and put the 2 on the bottom.
Yeah.
Card selection, I think, is better than ramping a single land. Especially because, like you said, there are a bunch of land enchantments in this deck already.
There are. The one thing I would say, too, is if you do want to keep the Farseek in here, or at least that type of spell, Farseek goes and gets you a Plains, Island, Swamp, or Mountain and put on the battlefield tapped. So you can go grab a dual land, you can go grab a Breeding Pool because it's an island, or you can go grab a Godless Shrine because it's a Plains and a Swamp. So you can grab dual lands with it. However, in a 5-color deck, Nature's Lore and 3 Visits, which is now pretty cheap, it's a couple bucks, also get you dual lands and they get them untapped. Your selection probably isn't quite as wide because it has to have the forest subtype. So yes, you can get Breeding Pool, but no, you can't get Godless Shrine because it has to have the forest. So there's a few less targets for it. But if you do add a couple of Triomes, then you can still go get those as well if you absolutely need that hard fixing. And it doesn't come into play tapped. I don't think it's a huge deal, but if you have a Nature's Lore or a 3 Visits left over from Commander Legends just sitting right there, it's maybe a super minor enough upgrade that it comes into play untapped, unless you're grabbing a Triome, obviously, that I might make that swap, but I don't think it's a huge deal.
Yeah.
Day of Judgment. Thoughts on that one?
So this isn't an aura deck. So in my Enchantress deck, I run Winds of Wrath. It's 1 more mana.
Yep.
But destroys all non-enchanted creatures. He runs a Yavimaya Hollow, so I get why Day of Judgment is in here over Wrath of God or Damnation.
That's the one thing I think that makes Day of Judgment make sense here is you're probably using Yavimaya Hollow, which you can go get with Sisay because it is a legendary land.
Yep.
So you can go fetch Yavimaya Hollow, regenerate Sisay when you cast Day of Judgment. So that's a good catch and a good thing to explain to people that this is a deck where it is logical to run Day of Judgment over something like Wrath of God, which normally would be strictly better.
Yeah, I think it's fine. It's a board wipe in a deck that doesn't want a lot of non-permanent spells in it, so you take what you can get, and especially working around that Yavimaya Hollow, I think it's a great fit.
Yeah.
The one card I'm not so sure on is Primal Surge. So it's 10 mana, exile the top card of your library. If it's a permanent, you put it onto the battlefield. If you do, you repeat the process. Currently, there are only 7 non-permanents in this deck. So your hit rate is great.
Yep.
It's also 10 mana. In a deck that's running 35 lands and 2 3-mana rocks. And there's not a lot of draw really in this deck. So I feel like you're either going to get that in your first 5 turns and hold on to it because you want to do it, which I totally understand. I love casting Primal Surge. It's fun. It's kind of what EDH is about. But at the same time, I feel like it's a dead card more often than not, or it's going to be a dead card more often than not.
Sure.
I would think replacing it with a card called Dance of the Manse. It was from Throne of Eldraine. It's a sorcery for X, white, and blue. Return up to X target artifact and or non-aura enchantment cards with converted mana cost X or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. If X is 6 or more, those permanents are 4/4 creatures in addition to their other types. I believe I did some math here. When I did my counts, there were 21 non-aura enchantments in this deck. So you pay 8 mana, 2 mana less than Primal Surge to recur your artifacts and enchantments that you want back. Bring back that Privileged Position, bring back that No Mercy, bring back that Rhystic Study. And on top of it, now they're creatures, which, it opens the door to a board wipe or something like that, but it's more bodies that you can attack with, which is what he wants to be doing.
Right.
And I don't see this card played very often, so I kind of want to see someone play it.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's a good point there. I like how it at least gives you a chance to do something unique and different.
Yeah.
Although Primal Surge is also kind of a win condition. If you are at that point and you hit it and draw it and can cast it, it's probably going to win you the game.
Probably.
So if that's a concern, he was talking about not having enough ways to win here, that might give an option to actually do that. But Primal Surge also is one of those cards that, for me at least, once I've successfully cast it a couple times, I'm like, okay, I've done that. I don't need to do it again.
Right.
But maybe he hasn't in the deck long enough to have hit enough actual successful cast with it, so he still wants to do that. So I get that.
Yeah.
Talking about cards that, would interfere with Primal Surge, there's only 3 instants here as well. So we discussed the sorceries that wouldn't work with it. The last thing is the instants. We have Eladrami's Call, which is 2 mana, search your library for a creature card, reveal it, and put it into your hand. We have Enlightened Tutor, which you can search for an artifact or enchantment card at instant speed and put on top of your library for 1 white. And Worldly Tutor for 1 green. You can search your library for a creature card and reveal it and put it on top of your library. So 3 different tutors. I mean, this all makes sense here. Worldly Tutor is probably pretty often going to functionally be a different enchantress almost. You're going to use it to go grab an enchantress pretty often, so you can have a draw engine going. Enlightened Tutor gets you a good enchantment. Eldrami's Call gets you probably an enchantress, or at least something that you really need at that moment. Like, they're all really solid. What do you think?
Yeah, I totally agree. It's just ways to maybe get your engine started, especially if these are in your opening hand. Go Tutor for that Argothian Enchantress or that Mesa Enchantress and get on top of your library. Drop it next turn and just start dropping your enchantments to get your engine going. I love all 3 of these cards.
Yeah, me too. So what do we have for creatures here?
Okay, we have 15 creatures. So there's an Academy Rector, a Layla Artful Provocateur, Argothian Enchantress, Captain Sisay, Dryad of the Elysian Grove, Mesa Enchantress, Nicol the Ravager, who also flips to become Nicol the Arisen, a Planeswalker. Then there's a Satyr Enchanter, Seedborn Muse, Citizen Champion, Starfield Mystic, Tuvasa the Sunlit, Verudian Enchantress, Yidris Maelstrom Wielder, and Zur the Enchanter.
That's a pretty good creature suite for this kind of deck. Unfortunately, there's not a ton of legendary creatures that necessarily that he doesn't already have that interact here. Are there any creatures you'd like to see in this deck besides what's already here, Max?
Okay, this is where bulk of my looking at this deck went to.
Okay.
So I said earlier in the show, scrap all the Planeswalkers. Let's focus on stuff that interacts with enchantments.
So that gives you plenty of room here to add creatures if you go that route.
Yeah, essentially we have 10 cards we can play with, is how I looked at this. So what I did is I went to Scryfall and I did search for legendary creature, and in its Oracle text it has to say the word enchantment. That's what I did. Okay. That gets you 20 results, 3 of which are already in the deck, Alayla, Tuvasa, and Zur. So out of the 17 options, these are the ones I think that would be cool to play or might actually help the deck long term make it to the end game. The first one being Daxos Returned. He is the precon from Commander 15, the experience counter one. Again, 3 mana, but when you play an enchantment, you get an experience counter. And if he can stick around, the more experience counters you have, you can start popping out tokens equal to the amount of experience counters you have. So that's just a kind of a value engine right there if he can stick around, because maybe he will get targeted right away, maybe he won't.
Right.
There's only really one way to find out. And the fact that he's only 3 CMC, Sisay can grab him early, which I like. The next one is Urtai the Corrupted. This is a legendary creature, and it's the big thing about it is you can pay a blue and tap to sacrifice a creature or an enchantment to counter a spell. There are no counter spells in this deck, there's no Rift, kudos on that, but here is a legendary creature that Sisay can go get, and then you can just sacrifice. Maybe you don't need that Wild Growth anymore. Sacrifice it, counter that Wrath of God, counter that Beast Within, counter that Teferi's Protection that's stopping you from winning the game. The next one is Eutropia, the Twice Favored. This was from Theros Beyond Death. It just has a constellation trigger that says, whenever an enchantment enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. And they gain flying, so that's a good way to give Sisay evasion. Next one would be Gen, Arcane Weaver. It was our preview card, so you have to play it.
It was.
Duh. But no, it is besides that, it has that recursion ability for Mardu, tap, sacrifice an enchantment, bring something back. It's a cool little enchantment, recursion engine that you can get going, so you swap that Wild Growth for your No Mercy or your Rhystic Study. 3 mana in Mardu. It might be worth it in this deck because you do have ways to make all colors of mana. My next one is Hannah's Ship Navigator. This is probably better than Gen, just because her ability says pay 1 white and a blue, tap, return target artifact or enchantment card from your graveyard to your hand. So you don't have to sacrifice something. It's the same amount of mana, just different colors.
Right.
And it's just straight up get it out of your yard. Just a few left. Kogla the Titan Ape. This is my first defensive spell, I guess I would say. So Kogla, again, legendary creature. When it enters the battlefield, it fights up to 1 target creature you don't control. That's cool. But more importantly, when it attacks, destroy target artifact or enchantment defending player controls. That's a great way to get rid of someone else's Mirari's Wake or someone else's Ghostly Prison or something like that. But the icing on the cake for this card, in my opinion, is its activated ability. 1 and a green, return target human you control to its owner's hand. Kogla gains indestructible until end of turn. Guess what? Sisay is a human. So it's a great way to protect your commander. And finally, Zakama Primal Calamity, a big angry dinosaur that untaps all your lands when you cast it. But I don't think you're going to be doing that with Sisay's ability, but all the utility features of gaining life, bolting something, and destroying an enchantment on a big body, that'd be just great to see get dropped for free off of Sisay's ability.
Yeah, those all would just be powerhouses here, and like you said, they're gettable by Sisay, and they work towards a win condition. I think they generate value, and they do a better job working towards a win condition than the Planeswalkers probably do. And they don't require defense or babysitting to protect themselves like Planeswalkers do too. Right,
and for those paying attention at home, those were only 7 creatures. I didn't use all 10 slots because I think maybe we'll get to this towards the end of the show, but I think there are other cards that this deck needs just to kind of help it, oil the machine a little.
Yeah, and speaking of oiling the machine, there's a couple of non-legendary ones here I would suggest as well. They aren't necessarily fetchable by Sisay, but they might be fetchable by Zur or something who you could get with Sisay. Destiny Spinner is a 2-mana enchantment creature, so being an enchantment creature, it draws you still draws you a card off of all of the enchantresses you have in the deck, and it keeps your creatures and enchantments from being countered. So a little bit of protection is always very useful. And you can also use it to make a land into a creature with XX power and toughness, where X the amount of enchantments you control. So that's probably plenty of times in this deck you can use that ability to turn a land into like a 10-10 creature and swing in at somebody. I think the main utility here is keeping your stuff from being countered, but it's probably going to kind of replace itself if you have an Enchantress out, if not draw you extra cards beyond that. And I think it's a lot of just good value on a body in a deck if you have a few free slots by getting rid of Planeswalkers. Similarly, Eidolon of Blossoms is just 1 more Enchantress to draw you more cards. It's 1 more piece of the engine. It's also an enchantment itself, so it draws off other Enchantresses if you have them in play when you cast it, and it draws you a card off itself. So that would be a good one to have in here. Nylea's Colossus, another enchantment, and this is a win condition. It's an enchantment creature. When it or another enchantment enters the battlefield, you double a creature's power and toughness till end of turn. And that's whenever. So if you can cast this and then cast another enchantment, you can very easily take Sisay up from like a 6/6 to a 12/12 to a 24/24 just by playing this and one other small thing. So, I mean, it's a straight-up win condition. It's not tutorable by Sisay, but it's tutorable by things like the Eldrami's Call or Enlightened Tutor or Worldly Tutor. All 3 will go get it. And the last will be Doomwake Giant. Similarly to Nylea's Colossus, it triggers when it or another enchantment enters the battlefield, and creatures your opponents control get -1/-1 till end of turn. Like, that's a really solid sweeper, I think, in a deck playing this many enchantments here as well. So if you free up room by switching off the Planeswalker plan, you can get a lot of these creatures in your deck that I think do a better job of pushing you towards a win.
For sure.
So last but definitely not least in an Enchantress deck, there's all the enchantments here. We have an Abundant Growth, which is a land aura enchantment like we talked about a couple of the other ones adding. There's already one in here, an Abundant Growth. There's All That Glitters. It's an aura. Enchanted creature gets +1/+1 for each artifact and or enchantment you control. Angelic Renewal. Whenever a creature is put into your graveyard from the battlefield, you may sacrifice it and return it to the battlefield. Day of Destiny. Legendary creatures you control get +2/+2. And in a deck filled with them, that's pretty effective. Defense of the Heart. During your upkeep, if one of your opponents controls 3 or more creatures, sacrifice it and search your library for 2 creature cards and put them directly into play. Detention Sphere basically is a kind of Oblivion Ring, but it Oblivion Rings anything with the same name as well. So in ETBs, and you exile target non-land permanent, not named Detention Sphere, and anything else with the same name. So you take out a whole swarm of tokens. If 2 people just so happen to have Soul Rings out, you can get rid of both of them, whatever. It's a pretty useful bit of removal, and it's an enchantment.
I'm going to pause you right there. I am pretty sure in my EDH career, I have played this card incorrectly and Detention Sphered a Detention Sphere.
Oh, you have? Okay. I was wondering if that's ever came up, because I can't think of ever. I run it in my Sphinx deck, and I've never hit a Detention Sphere with it.
I think I've done it to Dr. Mike, honestly.
Nice. Well, there we go.
I learned something today, everybody.
Exactly. Doubling Season, which if you aren't running the Planeswalkers, I think I would definitely cut that.
For sure.
Enchantress' Presence is basically an enchantment enchantress. Estrid's Invocation, it enters the battlefield as a copy of an enchantment you control, and at the beginning of your upkeep, you can exile it and return it to the battlefield, so you can basically re-choose what it's copying. Gift of Paradise is just one more of those enchant lands that make the land tap for more mana. Imprison in the Moon lets you aura one of your opponent's creatures, presumably, and turns it into a colorless land. I said creature, but technically you can also hit a land or a planeswalker with this. So it's like a removal spell by proxy of kind of polymorphing something. Journey to Nowhere is a 2-mana enchantment, non-aura, that comes into play and just exiles a creature until Journey to Nowhere leaves the battlefield. Leyline of the Void is an enchantment that you may begin the game with it in play if it's in your opening hand, but more importantly, it just turns your graveyard into an exile zone. So whenever something gets put in your graveyard, it's exiled instead. And Mirari's Wake, 5 mana, creatures you control get +1/+1, and whenever you tap a land for mana, it produces any 1 mana of the type that land could produce. So basically, it's essentially a mana doubler for lands.
Okay, then we also have a Mystic Remora. Non-creature spells your opponents cast, they have to pay 4, or you draw a card, and it has that cumulative upkeep of 1. New Horizons, another land enchantment, and it also gives a creature a +1/+1 counter when it enters the battlefield. No Mercy, a 4-mana enchantment in black. Whenever a creature successfully deals damage to you, destroy it. Oath of Teferi, when it enters the battlefield, you exile another permanent you control and return it to the battlefield under its owner's control at the next end step. But more importantly, you may activate loyalty abilities of planeswalkers you control twice each turn, rather than only once. Again, if we're cutting the planeswalkers, this can probably get cut as well, just like Doubling Season. Oblivion Ring, old standard right there. Privileged Position, all your other stuff has hexproof. Propaganda, creatures can't attack you unless its controller pays 2 for each creature. Heuristic Study, everybody knows that card. A Search for Azcanta, at the beginning of your upkeep, look at the top card of your library. You may put it into the graveyard, and then if your graveyard has 7 or more cards, you flip it into the Azcanta, the Sunken Ruins, which taps for a blue. And then it also has 2 and a blue and tap. Look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may reveal a non-creature and non-land card from among them and put it into your hand and put the rest on the bottom in any order. This is an all-star in my Enchantress deck, and I've used both sides of it many times. Smothering Ties, everybody knows what that does. Then we have Steel Enchantment. It's blue to gain control of enchanted enchantment, because that's how we worded cards back in Tempest. Unbridled Growth, another land aura for a single green, but you can also sacrifice this to draw a card. So kind of a cool take on the old ones where they would just draw a card on ETB.
Yep.
We also have Whirlwind of Thought, which is 1 and Jeskai. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, draw a card. And to wrap it up, we have the good old Wild Growth.
Whew.
It's a lot of enchantments.
It's a lot of enchantments. And a lot of it makes sense. I have a couple notes here. I mentioned this already multiple times previously. I would definitely put an Ancestral Mask in here. It just makes creatures so big that I think it's definitely worth running. Because there are times in the game, even if you don't put it on Sisay, you're like, oh, I'm going to put it on this Argothian Enchantress and turn it into a 16/16, and I can kill somebody with it. Anything you put it on most of the time in this deck is going to be pretty close to taking somebody out. So that's one I would try to find room for here, maybe to replace things like Doubling Season or what have you. And it's again, not a huge upgrade, but like Song of the Dryads, and it's also not nothing either. It is $10, but it's a better Imprison in the Moon for the most part, because you can hit any permanent target with it versus just being able to hit a creature, land, or planeswalker. So long term, that would be, I think, a good upgrade too. I do like those enchantments that keep the person from recasting their commander when it makes it useless, but Song of the Dryads is just a better version of Imprison in the Moon for the most part, and I would try to switch to that one. I would also note that Propaganda, if you take the planeswalkers out, it probably gets better.
It's so much better.
Because it doesn't protect your planeswalkers, because you can still attack planeswalkers, you just can't attack the player. So it's not as protective as it seems right now, because they can still get through to hit those walkers. If their walkers aren't there anymore, suddenly there's much more incentive to attack somebody else since they can't attack you, versus saying, well, I can't attack you, but I can still hit Liliana Vess, so I'm going to hit her.
Right.
Any notes from you here on the enchantments, Max?
So I have a couple written down, and the more I kind of thought about this today, I don't like some of my things I wrote down yesterday, because that's how life is.
Sure.
Sterling Grove is just a nice card that gives all your enchantments hexproof. All other enchantments you control can't be the target of spells or abilities. So all your stuff all your enchantments have Shroud. And then you can pay 1 and sacrifice it to search your library for an enchantment card and reveal it, and shuffle your library and put it on top. So it's like an Enlightened Tutor, but also can just sit there and just protect your stuff. That one I think could definitely go in here. It is on the higher end of the budget. It's at about $15 for the Invasion copy. There is a Judge promo that's double that essentially.
I have very rarely ever had an issue with it in my Sigarda Enchantress deck, with it being a problem, since it does keep you from targeting your own stuff as well sometimes. In part because if you get to that point where it is causing a problem, you can just sacrifice it to tutor something up.
So some of my newer includes that I've kind of been thinking about today are stuff to keep Stuart alive until everything's set up. You know, he already has Smothering Tithe and Propaganda and Rhystic Study and Mystic Remora, so the taxing effects.
Yep.
But you could easily add stuff like the White Propaganda. Why can't I think of that name right now?
Ghostly Prison.
You could definitely add stuff like that just to make sure it is a little slower for people to get at you.
Right.
I do have a couple other aura suggestions, though. Ethereal Armor. It's a single white, and it's the whole effect of all that glitters and Ancestral Mask. The creature just gets +1/+1 for each enchantment you control.
Yep.
And it has first
strike. Right.
For 1 mana. That's just awesome. And ironically enough, it is a removal target. I have had countless times for people get rid of my Ethereal Armor, not knowing that I've had all that glitters or Ancestral Mask stuck in my hand. It's like, cool, thanks for wasting your generous gift. Now I'm going to play this one that's even worse.
Right.
I also think adding a few gods to this is going to be beneficial, knowing that we're adding a bunch more creatures. Now, granted, a lot of the gods require devotion, and I don't think we're ever going to hit those devotion marks in this deck. You'd really have to totally tune this deck to play with the gods so you could use them as creatures.
Right.
But adding just the original Heliod, giving all these new creatures vigilance, means you can block. You can attack and block with no worries. Versus,
and you can make more creatures if you need to have them available there.
Which count as enchantments for things that might matter, like if an enchantment enters the battlefield.
Yep.
So that would be the one for sure I would add as the original Heliod. But even stuff like Staggering Insight. It's a white and a blue. It's an aura. It gives the enchanted creature +1/+1 and lifelink. And then whenever it hits a player, you draw a card. I think overall this deck needs more card draw. And we got rid of a lot of it by taking the planeswalkers out. But even without those, as I saw doing my test runs, it was hard to get draw going unless you hit a Rhystic Study or a Chase Bellerin or an Alayla on curve. And so I think if you can get auras, because you're already doing the enchantment stuff that do stuff like that. When you hit a player, draw a card. Do something, draw a card. ETBs, draw a card. Like Shielding Plaques. Enchanted creature for 2 in Hybrid Simic. When it comes into play, draw a card. The enchanted creature has hexproof. You're protecting Sisay, you're drawing a card. You cast an enchantment, you probably drew a card just off the cast off of something else in this deck.
Yep.
So those would be kind of some of my things, would be look for cards that 2 for 1, essentially. You draw a card, gives you hexproof. Draw a card, give you first strike. You know, even if it's just enters the battlefield, draws a card, you're replacing it. And that's what's going to matter in this deck that doesn't have a lot of what I would call standard draw, like your factor fictions or your charter courses or stuff
Right.
like that.
The last card I would mention, and I know this is one you are a big fan of as well, Max, is Duelist's Heritage.
Yeah.
Whenever one or more creatures attack, you may have target attacking creature gain double strike until end of turn. Number one, it doesn't get 2-for-1, like something like Battle Mastery, where you put on your whatever creature, and the creature dies, it's in your graveyard, and then you have to like hope you have a replenish or something. It's just an enchantment that sits there, and you choose the creature to give double strike to during the point that matters. So it's a little more resilient than an actual aura, even though it doesn't. Things that care about auras specifically don't benefit from it, but that's not that many cards. However, the fact that it doesn't care about just your creatures is way more relevant than you would think. Like, I have used this plenty of times, politically speaking, or even just to kill somebody by like saying, hey, I can give your thing Duelist Heritage if you swing at, whatever person it is. And, oh, sure. And you can kill somebody by giving a double strike. I've just done that a whole bunch of times with this card, in addition to how great it is on my own creatures.
Yeah, totally.
So that's a win condition level card here that Zur can go get and turns the game around completely and sits there and is hard to remove and causes kind of a little bit of chaos as well that you can control. So that's one I would strongly consider in here also. So Max, what are your final thoughts here looking at this deck and how it will look if you made some of these changes?
First off, Stuart, thanks for submitting this. We appreciate it. I've played a few games with you in the past. I always enjoy playing with you. Hopefully we can play again in the near future, especially if you do make some of these changes or just change it however you feel fit. Maybe you don't even listen to us at all. That's up to you.
Absolutely.
But I definitely think you hit it on the head. This is a deck with a split personality. I'm kind of dealing with that with one of my decks right now. And I know I agree with Dana. I think taking these Planeswalkers out, even though they help with the Sisay aspect of being able to tutor them up, they aren't doing enough, I think, especially when you want to go so heavy into enchantments.
Yes.
I think there is a Planeswalker build for Sisay. I'm sure there is. It's edhrec.com. Search this commander and click the new theme button and do the drop down because the site got upgraded and it looks great. But
well, thank you.
I just think you need to balance it out. Wanting to do enchantments on a non-enchantment based commander is really unique and cool, so I give you a lot of kudo points for that. But I really like the deck how it is, and I think the changes that both Dana and I recommended will make it 10 times better.
Yeah, that's kind of my agreement too. The split personality thing is, and it's also frustrating. Like it's it also not only isn't entirely effective, it's something that like I find frustrating in a deck when you are going two different directions and they're not complementary directions, and you draw one card that doesn't interact with the second card at all, and then you're like, okay, which do I play this turn? And then you draw the next turn the wrong one. You draw the one that interacts with a card still in your hand. You're like, ugh. So like it can make for a unpleasant play experience just because it's never fun playing a deck when it's not working.
Yeah.
So I think take your Planeswalkers out, find another deck to make for your Super Friends deck, whether it's something like Joyra Weatherlight Captain. She could be your Planeswalker Super Friends commander, or somebody else for a 5-color Super Friends deck, however you want to do. But I agree. I think trying kind of refocusing and kind of steering back towards the center of one theme here is probably the best bet. I do really like the idea, however, of a 5-color Enchantress deck. I don't know if I've seen that before.
I do too.
Yeah.
And, my original thought, even after reading Stuart's notes to us, was like, man, I know Sisay is what he wants to run, and I get the nostalgia and everything, but dang, it'd be great to see Kenrith here, and it would solve a lot of problems.
Sure, yeah.
Just with that inherent baked in all of his abilities, draw a card, boom, and right. But I get it. Sisay's a cool card. It's a cool character.
Yes.
It's nostalgic to you. Keep doing it. I love it. And I do have one little thing to throw in here, Dana, because we both forgot about this card, and I want to say it before the internet tells us. Put a Thirst for Meaning in this deck. It's 2 and a blue instant. Draw 3 and discard 2 unless you discard an enchantment. It's a powerhouse. Just being able to do it at instant speed, and maybe you don't need that wild growth on turn 12. Chuck it.
Right.
Or put that big enchantment that you can't cast right now into your graveyard, knowing that you drew a replenish that you're going to cast next turn.
Yeah, no, that's a good call.
So,
all right, I think that is going to wrap it up for this week's show. Thank you very much to Stuart, and thanks to you, Max, for helping me out here when Chris is going on life vacation here, I guess, for a couple days.
No problem. Happy to be here. It's always a joy to do this show. I was talking about this today at work. We're going on almost 4 years of doing this.
I know, that's insane.
Yeah.
Yeah, we will hit episode 300, I think, probably before the end of the year. Assuming we do a few Thursday shows along the way, we'll be pretty close to 300 by the end of the year. That's nuts.
We'll have to do something big for that.
Yeah, we'll think of something for sure.
I might put pants on.
Yes, right. That something that big that Max will wear pants for sure. All right, that is going to wrap up episode 245. I'm Dana. You can find me on the Twitter birds at Dana Roach. You can find Max at CMDR_Max, and you can find Chris at WiseSquishy1. Our show was edited by Rafael Garcia. You can find him at Ursa Bearwalker. And our podcast theme is Retro Future Dirty by Kevin MacLeod, licensed via Creative Commons. We will be back next week with another show. Until then, I am Dana.
And I'm Max.